Welcome to HD Rare Coins, your ultimate source for rare coins, fascinating history, and the thrill of discovery. From legendary pennies to hidden gems, we explore the world of numismatics one amazing coin at a time. It began like so many other stories in the numismatic world, with something small, something ordinary, something overlooked. A 10-cent piece, minted in the year 1970, tumbled from the presses of the United States Mint, cool and sharp with fresh luster, indistinguishable at first glance from millions of others that year. But not every coin is created equal, and not every dime carries the weight of a hidden legacy. This particular dime, struck in an era of shifting national priorities and subtle transitions in minting technology, would one day be remembered not for its face value, but for the fortune it would hold. The year 1970 was a fascinating moment in American history. The country stood in the midst of cultural transformation. The Vietnam War cast a long shadow, while the voices of protest and reform echoed through cities and campuses. Technology was advancing, society evolving, and the fabric of the United States felt as if it was being rewritten. In the middle of it all, the U.S. Mint quietly continued its operations, producing the currency that would pass through the hands of everyday Americans: dimes, quarters, nickels, and pennies, all minted with precision, purpose, and a quiet sense of tradition. Among the coins struck that year, the Roosevelt dime stood as a continued tribute to a president whose leadership during the Great Depression and World War II had earned enduring respect. Designed by John R. Sinek, the dime's obverse featured the resolute profile of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, his gaze set forward, his name arched boldly above. It was a design familiar to Americans since 1946, and by 1970, it had become one of the most recognizable faces in their pockets. But beneath that familiar image, subtle changes had taken place. Unlike earlier decades, the 1970 dimes bore no silver content. The shift had occurred just a few years earlier, in 1965, when rising silver prices forced the mint to remove the precious metal from circulating coins. The new dimes were clad, layers of copper sandwiched between a thin outer coating of cupronickel. They shimmered slightly differently under the light, a bit more muted, a bit less noble. Still, they performed their function, and the American public accepted them without much complaint. Money was money, after all, but to a trained eye, and to collectors who understood the nuances of coinage, the 1970 Roosevelt dimes were more than just tokens of commerce. They were pieces of a broader puzzle, part of a long and evolving lineage of American coin design. Some would be struck with precision, others with flaws. Some would be circulated and worn, others preserved by accident or intention. And within that year's production, hidden among the ordinary, was a rarity destined to rewrite its own value. It wasn't found right away. In fact, the coin sat dormant for decades, tucked inside an old proof set, resting quietly, unremarked. Proof sets, those carefully packaged coins sold by the mint to collectors, were often considered keepsakes rather than investments. They were gifts, souvenirs, stored away in drawers or passed down between generations. No one thought much of them. Certainly, no one expected that one of them might contain a dime worth over $150,000, but it did. The key to the coin's value, as it would turn out, was not in what it had, but in what it lacked. The dime, a 1970 S-proof Roosevelt, was missing a mint mark. A small detail, easy to overlook. And yet, to collectors, that missing S turned an ordinary coin into a phenomenon. It was an error, a rarity. A mistake that wasn't supposed to exist. Only a few examples had ever been found. And those that did surface were quickly snatched up, their value rising with each passing year. To understand why this missing mintmark mattered, one must understand the importance of those tiny letters. Mintmarks identify where a coin was struck: P for Philadelphia, D for Denver, S for San Francisco. In the case of the 1970 S dime, every proof coin should have borne the S. Every single one. That was standard. That was protocol. The proof dimes were exclusively minted in San Francisco. So the absence of that letter meant only one thing: a mistake during production. A coin planchet struck before the mint mark was added to the die. A phantom dime, born of an oversight, and that oversight would create a legend. Collectors began scouring their collections, revisiting old proof sets, flipping their dimes with greater scrutiny. Word spread quickly through the numismatic community. The 1970 No.S. Roosevelt dime was now a recognized rarity, and its value soared accordingly. What was once a 10-cent coin had, in the eyes of the market, become a miniature treasure. Years later, at a major auction in New York, one of these elusive dimes was offered to the public. It came encased in a protective slab, graded PR 68 by a respected third-party grading service. Under the glare of the showroom lights, its mirrored surfaces gleamed. The bidding was fast, fierce, and full of disbelief. A dime, just a dime, was fetching tens of thousands of dollars. And then, as the gavel fell, the room fell silent for just a moment, before the murmurs began. $153,000. That was the final price paid for a 1970 No.S. Roosevelt dime in exceptional condition. A coin that, by all rights, shouldn't exist. A piece of modern American currency that, through a fluke in the minting process and the vigilance of a collector, had become a legend in its own right. That final price reverberated through the numismatic world. It wasn't just about the figure, it was about what it symbolized. A simple dime, struck in the middle of the 20th century, had transformed into a six-figure icon not through gold or silver content, not through historical ties to kings or revolutions, but through the power of error, scarcity, and relentless human curiosity. This dime became a case study in what makes coin collecting so endlessly fascinating, how a single oversight could create something of immeasurable intrigue. The 1970 No.S. dime instantly rose in status. It entered numismatic literature, finding a place in price guides, collector manuals, and articles that reached hobbyists around the world. Suddenly, it wasn't just seasoned collectors who knew about the 1970 dime's value. Casual hobbyists, families flipping through old coin albums, even new collectors drawn in by headlines, began seeking this ghostly treasure. Dealers were swarmed with requests. Did they have one? Had they ever seen one? Could it be true that something so small, so common in concept, could reach such monumental value? Every detail of the coin was now studied under microscopes and lenses. The finish, the die polish lines, the precise angle of strike, all were dissected with clinical precision. Every known example was catalogued and tracked, and speculation grew over how many might actually exist. Was it just a handful? A dozen? Could there be more still out there, forgotten in unopened proof sets tucked away in attics or long-sealed safety deposit boxes? The U.S. Mint, for its part, made no public statement on the error. In many ways, this added to the mystique. There was no official confirmation of how the mistake had occurred, only theories and educated guesses. Perhaps a single proof die intended for circulation had accidentally been fed into the press. Perhaps someone at the mint missed a step in adding the mintmark punch. But those details didn't matter as much as the outcome, a living anomaly. A mistake that collectors would one day revere. For those lucky enough to own one, the dime became more than a collectible, it became a symbol. It told a story of watchfulness, of luck, of the unpredictable magic found in a coin that most would dismiss. For every coin collector who ever sat for hours sorting through proof sets, patiently flipping through coins, brushing away dust and peering under magnifying glasses, the 1970 dime became a validation of effort and passion. One such story tells of a man in Ohio, an accountant by trade, quiet and modest in his demeanor, who had been collecting proof sets since the 1960s. He'd amassed hundreds of them, all stored neatly in chronological order in his study. When he heard whispers online of the missing S dime, he quietly, methodically began checking each 1970 set he owned. And there, in the third set he opened, it was a 1970 proof dime with no mintmark. His heart reportedly skipped a beat. He sent it off for grading, not daring to believe it could be real. Weeks later, it returned, certified, authenticated, and graded PR 67. That coin later sold at auction for over $90,000. The man didn't quit his job. He didn't flaunt the sale. But in interviews, he spoke of how the experience renewed his love for the hobby. It reminded me, he said, that anything is possible when you pay attention. Even a mistake can be worth a fortune. Stories like his spread throughout the community. The legend of the 1970 dime took on a new dimension, not just as a rare coin, but as an emblem of perseverance and hope. It became a gateway for a new generation of collectors who realized that the world of coins wasn't locked in the past, it was alive, full of discovery, and still ripe with secrets. Collectors began looking more closely at all their proof sets, especially those from transitional years or years of significant production shifts. The 1968, 1969, and 1971 proof sets suddenly received renewed scrutiny. After all, if a mint mark could be missed once, it could be missed again. Entire communities dedicated themselves to sleuthing out similar anomalies, combing through sets like modern-day treasure hunters. And in rare instances, they found them. In a quiet Denver morning in 1975, the humming rhythm of coin presses echoed through the halls of the U.S. Mint. Thousands of tiny blanks, known as planchets, were being fed into powerful machines, each destined to become a piece of everyday currency. Amid the controlled chaos, something seemingly routine was happening, yet years later, one of those dimes would surface, changing the way collectors looked at the entire year of coinage. That dime, struck with a simple D below Roosevelt's neck, would go on to achieve the unthinkable, a market value of $148,000. It didn't start with drama or spectacle. The 1975 D dime entered circulation just like the rest, bearing the classic image of President Franklin D. Roosevelt, a symbol of American leadership and recovery. Since 1946, Roosevelt's profile had graced the dime in tribute to his legacy and his championing of the March of Dimes. The coin's designer, John R. Sinek, created an enduring image, one that stayed virtually unchanged for decades. But beneath that consistency lay hidden stories waiting to be discovered. The 1975 D dime, on the surface, was just another in a long line of Roosevelt dimes. Struck at the Denver Mint, the coin carried the familiar D mint mark, identifying its origin. It was made from a copper-nickel-clad composition, the same as all circulating dimes since the U.S. phased out silver coinage in the mid-1960s. Measuring 17.91 millimeters in diameter and weighing 2.27 grams, it was the kind of coin people rarely looked at twice. And yet, that unassuming piece of metal was about to become a legend. What made this coin so special was not immediately obvious. In fact, it would take decades before its true value was recognized. Among coin experts, the year 1975 is infamous not for what was made, but for what wasn't. No proof dimes were minted in 1975, because the mint was preparing for the upcoming bicentennial celebrations in 1976. Instead, special 1976 dated bicentennial coins were struck a year early. This decision led to the absence of any 1975 dated proof dimes, making pristine examples of the regular strike even more sought after by collectors. But even beyond this rarity, some examples of the 1975 D dime began to show extraordinary characteristics. Whether it was due to exceptional strike quality, unexpected die varieties, or undiscovered minting quirks, a handful of coins stood out from the millions produced. Collectors began to take note, and prices started to climb. One such coin, perfectly preserved in near-flawless condition, was submitted to a grading service and returned with an astounding Mint State 68 designation. For numismatists, this level of preservation is exceedingly rare. With only a few such examples known to exist, competition among collectors was fierce. When it finally hit the auction block, bidding erupted. The final price stunned even seasoned experts. $148,000. What drove this incredible value wasn't just the coin's grade, it was its story. The 1975 D dime had transformed from a pocket change piece into a numismatic marvel. Every element, the historic year, the mint's production choices, the near-perfect preservation, conspired to create a legend, and that's only the beginning. In the wake of that jaw-dropping auction, collectors everywhere began to examine their own 1975 D dimes with a new sense of wonder. Coin albums that had long gathered dust were opened. Magnifying glasses became tools of hope. The idea that something so ordinary, so overlooked, could possess such unimaginable value, it lit a spark that rippled through the entire numismatic world. And what exactly did collectors look for? It wasn't just the mint mark anymore. They scrutinized strike sharpness, inspected for die cracks or doubling, and even chased subtle colorations in the coin's luster. Mint state coins with full bands on the torch, those clean, distinct horizontal lines at the base of the torch on the reverse, became especially coveted. These full bands were a sign of a strong, crisp strike, and finding one in near-perfect condition was like unearthing buried treasure, but the most prized specimens were those with flawless surfaces, untouched by time or circulation. No fingerprints, no bag marks, no hairlines, just pure, gleaming brilliance. These were the coins that made hearts race, because they hinted at the possibility of another six-figure payday. And yet, even among tens of millions of 1975 dimes minted, only a precious few survived in such pristine form. The Denver Mint had long been known for producing coins in high volume. Located at the foot of the Rocky Mountains, it stood as a powerhouse of American coinage. In 1975 alone, the Denver facility struck hundreds of millions of dimes. It was a production environment focused on efficiency, not necessarily on perfection. Which is why any coin to emerge from that industrial process in virtually perfect condition was a minor miracle. That's what made the $148,000 dime so compelling. It wasn't a coin meant for presentation. It wasn't part of a special edition or collector set. It was just a regular coin, one that should have gone unnoticed. And yet, against the odds, it had survived in a condition that defied expectations. The story captured the public imagination. News outlets picked it up. Coin shows reported higher attendance. People rummaged through jars, desks, glove compartments, all looking for dimes dated 1975 with that telltale D. Some brought their finds to local dealers, their hands shaking as they asked, could this be the one? Most weren't. But the excitement wasn't about the odds, it was about the chase. The 1975 dime had become a symbol of possibility. And in a world that often feels predictable, it offered something rare, mystery. Behind that mystery was a blend of history and happenstance. The mid-1970s were a time of transition in American coinage. The country had officially moved away from silver in most circulating coins. The bicentennial celebration was reshaping the nation's coin designs for a short while. And the economic pressures of the time meant that coin production had to be fast and efficient. Against this backdrop, the idea that beauty and perfection could emerge from such utilitarian machinery was not just surprising, it was poetic. The Roosevelt dime itself, though often overlooked, carries deep meaning. Introduced in 1946, it was a tribute to a man who had led the nation through the Great Depression and World War II. The March of Dimes, a grassroots campaign to fight polio, had earned the coin its connection to Roosevelt. That connection endured for generations, with Roosevelt's profile gracing the dime uninterrupted ever since. Over time, his presence became so familiar that it faded into the background of everyday life. But the 1975 dime brought him back into focus. Suddenly, people were seeing Roosevelt again, his face representing not just courage and leadership, but now also luck and fortune. Collectors who once chased Morgan dollars or early copper cents began shifting attention to modern coins. Modern rarities, they called them. And among them, the 1975 dime was a cornerstone. Its reputation grew, not just for its market value, but for the enthusiasm it inspired. It didn't matter if someone had been collecting coins for 40 years or 4 weeks, everyone wanted to find a gem among the change, and so, the story continued. In coin clubs, online forums, and late-night conversations over velvet-lined cases, the 1975 dime became the stuff of legend. The legend of the 1975 dime wasn't just confined to coin circles, it found its way into mainstream culture. News outlets ran features about it. Social media lit up with users posting photos of their change, asking, could this be the one worth $148,000? For many, it was a fleeting curiosity. For others, it was the spark that started a lifelong interest in numismatics. Some even called it the gateway coin, a single piece that opened the door to a world of history, art, and treasure hunting. As stories of incredible finds continued to circulate, so did questions. Why was this dime worth so much? What made this particular year, and this specific mint mark, so special? The answer wasn't just about rarity, it was about the convergence of factors that made the 1975 D dime almost mythic. High mintage numbers meant that pristine survivors were statistically rare. The absence of 1975 proof dimes meant collectors had fewer high-grade options. And with Roosevelt's image largely unchanged since 1946, even small variations in strike or preservation stood out like beacons to the trained eye. Then came the experts. Professional graders and numismatists began to document every notable specimen of the 1975 D dime they encountered. High-resolution photographs, die variety logs, and auction records were compiled. Over time, it became clear that while millions of dimes were struck in Denver that year, fewer than a dozen had achieved the elite grading of MS-68 or higher with full torch bands. That level of quality, in a sea of mediocrity, made each such dime a titan. Collectors began categorizing the most coveted 1975 D dimes under specific grading labels. Top pop coins, those at the highest population grade known, became especially valuable. Even a 1-point jump in grade could mean tens of thousands of dollars in auction value. For example, a 1975 D dime graded MS-67 might fetch several $100s. But push that grade to MS-68 with full bands? That was a six-figure conversation. Auction houses like Heritage, Stack's Bowers, and Great Collections began receiving calls from hopeful collectors. One of the most famous transactions took place quietly at first. An anonymous consignor submitted a coin with an expected value of a few $1,000s. But once it was graded, the number came back higher than anticipated, mint state 68 with full bands. The moment that grade hit the public registry, the numismatic world reacted instantly.